All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unpack a wild global chain of events that's currently driving a terrifying new synthetic drug crisis. And honestly, the substance we're looking at today makes traditional threats look almost tame by comparison. It's wild.
To really grasp why this massive threat is suddenly showing up in European mailboxes, we need to map out the journey. So we'll quickly cover the Afghan poppy ban, Europe's heroin buffer, the sudden rise of Nitazenes, this new mail-order drug trade, the invisible overdose crisis it's causing, and finally, how we actually prepare for it with vital harm reduction strategies. Okay, Section 1. The Afghan poppy ban. A macroeconomic shock at the source. Our story actually starts out in the Helmand region of Afghanistan, a place where farmers have historically relied heavily on poppy cultivation, literally just to survive. Just to put this into perspective, before the Taliban cracked down and banned poppy cultivation in 2022, Afghanistan was churning out a staggering 90% of Europe's heroin supply. 90%. Think about the fragility of that setup. You've got almost an entire continent's illicit market relying heavily on a single, highly vulnerable agricultural bottleneck. So with the Taliban strictly enforcing this ban, the supply of natural opiates was completely upended. I mean, the Afghan poppy industry didn't just stumble here. It was effectively crushed overnight. And as we know, nature hates a vacuum, and so does the illicit drug market. Which brings us to Section 2. Europe's heroin buffer, or what you might call the calm before the synthetic storm. Now, despite that huge ban, Europe actually hasn't felt the crunch just yet. Why? Well, it all comes down to a pretty massive number, 13,200. There are massive stockpiles, up to 13,200 tons of opiates currently acting as a buffer. But, and this is a big but, experts are warning that this supply is likely to run dry by 2027. And when that happens, it paves the way for something much, much worse. And that leads right into Section 3, the rise of nitazenes. We're talking about resurrecting a 70-year-old chemical villain. Let's rewind a bit. Back in 1872, the base compound was first synthesized. Fast forward to the 1950s, and a Swiss lab named Ciba starts experimenting with nitazenes as a potential painkiller. But they completely shelved the project. Why? Extreme toxicity. It was just way too dangerous. So it lies dormant in scientific obscurity for decades. That is, until 2019, when clandestine Chinese labs strike synthetic gold. They basically resurrected these unregulated compounds as a direct response to new government fentanyl bans. So what makes this drug so incredibly dangerous? It is 200 times more potent than morphine. Let that sink in. It's even significantly stronger than fentanyl. We are talking about an absolute chemical heavyweight that requires microscopic precision to handle. In medical terms, nitazenes have what's called a very narrow therapeutic window. That means a miscalculation of just a few salt-sized grains is the difference between a high and instant death. There is literally almost zero margin for error here. And to make matters even more terrifying, we're facing something called naloxone resistance. These specific synthetics grab onto the brain's receptors so tightly that one dose of life-saving naloxone usually won't cut it. You often need multiple doses just to stop the overdose. So it's not just stronger, it actively resists the very tools we rely on to save lives. All right, Section 4, the mail-order drug trade. This is a massive logistical paradigm shift. This represents a fundamental shift in how drugs move around the globe. We aren't dealing with the traditional, clunky cartel model anymore. You know, the one that relies on vulnerable crops, unpredictable weather, and risky border crossings. Nope, we are now looking at a weatherproof, highly efficient, direct-to-consumer online machine. These drugs are being shipped straight from Chinese labs directly into European mailboxes. And, meanwhile, law enforcement is kind of looking in the wrong direction. For example, in 2023, German authorities poured massive resources into seizing 24 tons of cocaine, but they almost completely missed the synthetic opioids slipping quietly through the postal system. To give you an idea, that synthetic blind spot is represented by a tiny 140-kilo sliver of heroin seizures. It's so accessible, it's actually scary. Researchers recently demonstrated that purchasing one of the deadliest drugs on Earth takes about 15 minutes and 4 incredibly simple steps on your phone. You literally just search for an analog, shoot a vendor a message on Telegram, pay about $160, and boom, guaranteed European delivery.
The dark economics behind this are just unbeatable for organized crime. Because these synthetics are so extraordinarily potent, trafficking just 1 kilo can be equivalent to trafficking 50 kilos of heroin. This allows for massive, massive profits from tiny packages that seamlessly blend right into the millions of normal everyday parcels flowing through the mail.
Which drops us into Section 5, the invisible overdose crisis, the Trojan horse in Europe.
As these little packages arrive, they're fueling a completely invisible public health crisis that's hitting entirely new demographics. A lot of this is happening through the counterfeit market. These nitazenes get pressed into fake pills designed to look exactly like Xanax or oxycodone. It's a cheap way to turn useless powder into a highly addictive product. So you've got users, often young people just experimenting in their bedrooms, thinking they're buying safe pharmaceutical-grade anxiety meds online. They have absolutely no idea they're actually swallowing deadly lab-made nitazenes.
And compounding this whole tragedy is a massive detection blind spot in our healthcare and legal systems. Traditional toxicology tests, they miss nitazenes entirely. Those conventional fentanyl test strips, completely useless against this stuff. Even post-mortem exams routinely fail to screen for them. So we are regularly failing to even detect these novel substances after a fatal overdose has already occurred.
So, what do we do? Section 6, How to Prepare, Empowering the Public with Harm Reduction. Look, the situation is genuinely alarming, but there are actionable steps we can take right now to protect our communities. First off, we desperately need to modernize our early warning systems. We have to scale up public health tools. Things like wastewater analysis and anonymous mail-in drug testing services like Nitazenes over in Wales. We need these tools to track contaminated batches and detect these chemicals before the overdoses happen.
If you're wondering how to protect your own community, here's the checklist. Test your drugs using these modernized lab services. Raise awareness, specifically targeting those non-traditional, younger users who might be shopping online. And we need to advocate for broader, over-the-counter access to naloxone, which shockingly is still super limited across Europe right now.
I'm going to leave you with this final urgent thought as this synthetic storm really gathers on the horizon. If our traditional defenses are being